Red 2 standing by, all 4 lit, and in the green. Welcome back to Goldeneye, where we are heading into St. Petersburg. After the destruction of the Seven Eye bunker by use of the Goldeneye satellite, the path of the movie takes us to St. Petersburg. Using satellite observations, Bond and the crew at MI6 discovered that there was at least one survivor of the Seven Eye incident. Of course, we know that Ourumov stole the Goldeneye, but Bond doesn't know that yet, and M does have to caution him to make sure he doesn't go off on any revenge missions, pointing out that it wasn't Bond who got Trevelyan killed. Bond is still somewhat determined to avenge his friend, but when he arrives at St. Petersburg and makes contact first with Jack Wade, a brash CIA agent very different from Felix Leiter, but helpful in his own way and apparently fond of gardening. And then Russian mobster Valentin Zukovsky, an ex-KGB agent who walks with a limp Bond gave him. Bond winds up having his first confrontation with Yanis. We wind up skipping the confrontation with Xenia that preceded this, a somewhat literally steamy encounter, since part of it is a bit of a fight in a sauna, among other things. But today, we're going to have our lesson as we walk through a park full of Soviet-era statuary. Several of these do exist scattered throughout Russia, sort of dumping grounds from the old days. This is the only mission that has 5 objectives on all 3 difficulties. The cheat is on Secret Agent. Let's get going. So, as you can see, we have to contact Valentin, which happens before Bond gets here in the movie, as I said. Confront and unmask Yanis, locate the helicopter, rescue Natalia, and find the flight recorder. Bond and Natalia actually met in the helicopter, which was set to explode at the hands of its own missiles, but Bond manages to use his head, somewhat literally, and trigger the ejector seats. We never joke about our work here. Let's get going. Following the Seven Eye incident, MI6 has lost track of the pirate helicopter. Presumably the bugging device has been located and destroyed. Did you see how big that thing was? It was blatantly obvious. Natalia Simonova, who returned to St. Petersburg against our advice, has gone missing. We can only assume that she has been abducted by the Yanis Syndicate in a belated attempt to cover their tracks. Natalia was certain that Boris had survived because he went outside for a smoke beforehand and didn't come back in when Xenia wound up gunning everybody down. You can actually see that Ourumov has this look of disgust on his face as Xenia is getting serious pleasure. Somewhat literally, she is rather a sadomasochist who gets her kicks from violence. Ourumov has a look on his face that is basically saying, why am I allied with this psychopath? When you think about it, Ourumov kind of is the most normal of all the villains in this, and he stands out as a result. The situation is critical, 007. Yanis know we're onto them and they're taking control. We're going to circumvent the usual channels on this one. I've arranged contact with an ex-KGB agent, Valentin Zukovsky, in Statue Park, St. Petersburg. He claims he can set up a meeting with Yanis. Apparently the head of Yanis wants to see you in person. Frankly, I'm uneasy about this, but it's all we've got to go on. No gizmos this time, old boy, and apparently not very much space for dialogue either. That's a bit frustrating. Oh well. A damsel in distress. Just be careful with that chopper, James. Spectre, the Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge and Extortion, was born from the screen treatment written by Fleming, Kevin McClory and Jack Whittingham, which would go on to become the novel and movie Thunderball, and also cause the lengthy legal dispute which has been discussed in a few lessons. The settlement actually meant McClory technically owned Spectre, and this proved a little difficult for making a number of films. While everything went ahead with the Bond films that were being made at the time, Spectre did not appear after Diamonds Are Forever, despite plans to have them involved in The Spy Who Loved Me. They are, however, the antagonists in McClory's independent Bond film Never Say Never Again. It was only in 2013, when the rights were purchased from McClory's estate, that Spectre was able to return to the Bond franchise and settle itself in the Daniel Craig films. While not the first such example, Spectre is perhaps the shadowy criminal organisation, a group which, in its literary incarnation, comprised individuals with diverse political and criminal backgrounds. Members hailed from the Sicilian Mafia, the Union Corps, the Gestapo, the Soviet Union's MWD, Tito's regime in Yugoslavia, and Turkey. One wonders how all these vastly different political affiliations blended together so well, but all of them were incredibly skilled and all were untroubled by police despite their lifetimes in crime. Their unity may well have been down to the imposing presence of their leader, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. The literary Blofeld is a vastly removed figure from the likes of Donald Pleasance and Telly Savalas, and even more so in terms of personality from Charles Gray's somewhat foppish portrayal, though it's interesting to note that as far as physique goes, Gray is somewhat closer than the other two. Fleming gave his own birthday, May 28, 1908, to Blofeld, who was born in, and I apologise for the pronunciation, Gdynia in Poland. Blofeld has an intensely captivating presence, being the sort of man with great calm and certainty, a powerful physical presence, and incredible magnetism. He has a very imposing, fittingly large appearance to complement his aura. While his height is not initially listed, we find out that he stands about 6'3" and backs this up by being rather stout. The muscles from his youthful weightlifting pursuits has gone to fat, and he is said to weigh about 20 stone. His gaze seems sharply analytical, confident yet excoriating to the guilty, and his features are generally described as strongly authoritative. Blofeld does not drink or smoke, and is not known to have sexual relations of any kind, though later books mention that his nose appears to have suffered effects from syphilis. The damage was repaired sometime in between On Her Majesty's Secret Service and You Only Live Twice. In OHMSS, Blofeld's appearance has changed significantly in his guise as the Comte de Blerchamp. He has lost a lot of weight and changed some of his features. His ears stick out a little more, his hair is longer and silvery, and his nose is longer with the aforementioned marks of syphilis. As to how this came about when Blofeld was not known to engage in sex remains to be seen, but it may be a ruse. He also has no lobes to his ears, a de Blerchamp family trait. His look changes a little bit more when he is disguised as Dr. Guntram Shatterhand in You Only Live Twice, attempting to rebuild his funds to resurrect Spectre. He now has a black moustache and has repaired the damage to his nose. Perhaps the tendency to alter his appearance justifies the different actors in the films, but either way, none of the actors has ever quite captured the original physical appearance of Blofeld. Due to the films, however, Donald Pleasance's incarnation of Blofeld, bald, scar across the right eye, dressed in a Nehru suit and accompanied by a white Persian cat, has been the most remembered and subsequently the most parodied, with Dr. Evil from the Austin Powers trilogy being a standout example, though he does lack the scar. Even Christoph Waltz's incarnation from the Craig era winds up with the scar. In personality, Blofeld is cold and ruthlessly sociopathic with no concern for morals or ethics, but insists his organisation conducts itself in a superior and self-disciplined manner because if people fail to do that, then it will likely lead to their downfall, and he wants to make sure everything works efficiently. This is demonstrated in the organisation's first scene in the novel Thunderball. Blofeld questions Spectre's number 7 regarding a kidnapping of a casino boss's daughter, as Blofeld has discovered the girl was in some way, with her consent or not, he does not care, violated and thus returned in a used state as he puts it, where Spectre promised she would be returned undamaged. Brief diversion here, it is worth noting that in the books the numbers assigned to each senior member of Spectre rotate around the table by 2 on the first of every month. Blofeld is number 2 at the time of the novel and Emilio Largo holds number 1. While number 7 is innocent, Blofeld is satisfied with his conduct, the highest praise he gives. The questioning is a distraction in order to execute the guilty party, number 12, via electrocution. In the past, other members of Spectre whose actions have threatened to damage the stability, strength and cohesion of the organisation have been executed at the boardroom table, and any sub-operator who fails them is met with absolute punishment as well. Failure in Spectre is essentially the same as failing Darth Vader, and this tends to hold true in the films as well. A similar scene to the one above occurs in the cinematic Thunderball, but the crime is embezzlement instead. Blofeld is also shown to be shrewd and intelligent, having received university degrees in economics and politics according to the novels. His knowledge of information brokering allowed him to easily play the field in the lead up to and during World War II, selling secrets and manipulating the intelligence world with a range of networks. While he originally sold secrets to the Germans, he used a little more caution during the war after leaving Poland for Turkey, claiming refugee status while using the country as the core of his networks. Eventually, after Rommel's defeat in Africa, he would begin selling secrets and information to the Allies, earning many decorations and finishing his war days covered in glory. Over the years, Blofeld built up Spectre and its cover FIRCO, the Fraternité Internationale de la Résistance contre l'Oppression, an organisation dedicated to the ideals and records of World War II era resistance groups, establishing it as perhaps the most powerful force in world crime, an organisation capable of countless masterful schemes and operations. In the original continuity films, Spectre's history and that of Blofeld is never mentioned, but we do know it is an immensely powerful criminal group nonetheless, and Blofeld is smart enough to easily play the great powers off against one another, or even get involved in fields like biochemistry, all to satisfy his plans of world domination. Interestingly, the literary Blofeld seems to lose a bit more sanity as his plans are destroyed. His massive ego and desire for control and power wind up badly damaged by Bond destroying his operations. Plan Omega, his master scheme to hijack nuclear warheads and hold the world to ransom for 1 million, no actually 100 million pounds sterling in gold bullion, is ultimately unravelled by 007. While Bond winds up pulling a few threads in the movie, the novel actually reveals it was M who had a hunch about where Bond should go looking for the stolen warheads. In a way, there's a parallel between Blofeld and M, but the end result was Blofeld's plan was shattered and he moved on to his next scheme, biological warfare, at a lab situated in a mountaintop chalet serving as an allergy clinic. This, and Blofeld's intention to receive the title of Comte de Blerchamp, were the central focuses of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. The genealogy aspect was the thread MI6 sought to pull, with information from the College of Arms serving as the catalyst for Bond's investigations. While he generally holds things together, it's very clear Blofeld's defeat in that novel unhinged him. He is described as much harsher in You Only Live Twice, yelling more and having a less composed manner. While John Gardner would bring back Spectre in his novels, first under the command of Blofeld's daughter, we are not informed the new Blofeld is female until the end of the book as a neat twist, and then with Tamil Rahani at the helm during Roll of Honour and Nobody Lives Forever, there has not been the same impact as they had in Ian Fleming's hands. Where the films were concerned, events were changed to have Spectre running the show in Dr. No, From Russia with Love and Diamonds Are Forever, in addition to the films based on their actual appearances. Dr. No worked for China in the novel, but his goal of disrupting the US space program was adapted to being a Spectre scheme. The not-so-good Doctor even takes a few cues from his boss. He is a cool and menacing presence who can easily intimidate his subordinates, and speaks in a controlled monotone with little variance until everything is going wrong for him. We do not actually meet Blofeld in any form during this film, though he does make a physical appearance of sorts in From Russia with Love. It is likely that an easing in geopolitical relations was the reason behind having Spectre pulling the strings in the film. The plot is changed to have Spectre seeking revenge for Bond destroying Dr. No's operations, rather than being an outright Russian operation. Of course, the Russians would still be blamed. Colonel Klebb and Red Grant are still involved, with Klebb holding the rank of Spectre's number 3, but Grant was recruited by Spectre and Klebb's defection to them has largely been covered up. It's generally assumed she is still working for the Soviet Union, as Tatiana Romanova shows. Similarly, the master planner Kronstein is also working for Spectre instead of the Russians, though there is not as much concern about him leaving the chess match immediately after his victory compared to the novel. Spectre also orchestrates tensions between the British and the Russians on occasion throughout the film, adding to the idea that this is a Russian plot. Bond doesn't find out it's not the Russians behind it until Grant spills the beans in the lead up to the fight on the Orient Express. Blofeld's face was not seen in the film, but in this and Thunderball he was physically portrayed by Anthony Dawson and dubbed by Eric Pohlman, but was deliberately obscured in the film credits. Thunderball features Emilio Largo, who appears to be Blofeld's second in command going by the numbering structure in the film continuity, as the main operator of the scheme. As in the novel, Blofeld seems to have him set up as the overall commander of field operations. Just like the novel, Thunderball gives us perhaps the most classic and parodied spy movie plot ever. Hijack some nuclear warheads and hold the world to ransom. Plus there's a shark pool for someone to fall into, but no laser beams. Nor mutated sea bass. Largo himself is a charismatic but dangerous figure, presumably with connections to the Mafia. There is a certain charisma to Adolfo Celli's portrayal, mixed with a soft-spoken sadism that emerges when crossed. The novel indicates that he possesses the same kind of magnetism as, and similar physical stature to, Blofeld, though Largo is noticeably fitter and more muscular, pursuing a number of athletic recreations. He is described as looking like a Roman from the Empire's glory days, handsome and womanizing, with an intelligence and coolness which has ensured his success across many ventures and inspires loyalty in his men. This is certainly there to a good degree in the film, and Largo is quite capable of undertaking whatever duty Spectre's plan requires him to provide. You Only Live Twice changes the plot again, so that Blofeld is once more playing great powers off against one another, this time by using spacecraft to capture American and Russian launches in order to trigger World War III and ultimately fill the power vacuum. It would have been a little anticlimactic in some ways to have the literary plot, where Blofeld has established a sophisticated garden full of ways to entice the Japanese population to suicide for a fee, involved, but even then the film can seem a little over the top at times. Perhaps because Roald Dahl wrote the screenplay, I'm not kidding. This was Blofeld's first face reveal, and Donald Pleasence clearly made his mark as the sinister mastermind. His voice wasn't quite as deep as Pullman's, but the fact he remains icily calm for most of the film provides an excellent replacement effect. The one time he does yell adds to the sense of menace. Regardless of what one thinks about the voice, his look certainly worked. Originally, Czech actor Jan Werich was cast as Blofeld by Harry Saltzman without Cubby Broccoli's knowledge. Werich was described as looking too much like Santa Claus, and Pleasence ultimately replaced him. Note that some of the shots where you can't actually see Blofeld's face are still Jan Werich. The voice of Donald Pleasence was actually dubbed over those. Spectre's reach was described in the previous film, where its operations included selling Chinese-made drugs in America, but also assassinating a defector to the Soviet Union on behalf of France's security service. Its apparent legitimate fronts are further shown in its connections with Osato Industries. Not only does Osato work for them, but his secretary is Spectre's number 11, Helga Brandt. Again, short diversion, the actor who played the henchman Bond finds at Osato Industries, Peter Maivia, was not only given an extra role as a ninja at the climax of the film and hired to choreograph some fight scenes, but happens to be Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's grandfather. No wonder it took so much for Bond to put him down. Of course, neither Osato nor Brandt can actually kill Bond, despite having plenty of opportunities. Brandt leaving him to die in a crashing plane is a fairly notable mistake, even if it would look like an accident, and they die for their failure at the hands of their boss. Blofeld killing Osato before shooting Bond probably doesn't help his cause that much, as he gets a shuriken to the arm before he can kill his nemesis. To be fair though, this wasn't entirely Blofeld's fault, that one was slightly outside his control. As a bit of trivia, pay attention to the scenes where the base is attacked and the control room descends into chaos. Blofeld's cat is trying to flee. The poor animal would occasionally get so spooked during filming it would relieve itself on its master. At one point it ran away and was found a few days later hiding in the rafters. On Her Majesty's Secret Service sticks to Fleming's bioterrorism-based plot, with Blofeld intending to blackmail the world into giving him amnesty for past crimes and a noble title, in exchange for calling off the impending destruction of crop and farming animal strains via specially made viruses. Telly Savalas conveys the knowledge and genius with a hint of arrogance and superiority of Blofeld quite well, and this is perhaps the closest in many ways to the personality of Fleming's Blofeld the films came. He has also become a bit smarter about dealing with Bond. While he does initially believe Bond is Hilary Bray, or may just be playing along, when Bond blows his cover, Blofeld decides to keep him alive since Bond's word would help convince the West he's serious in his goals. which isn't the dumbest concept, but you can see how it'd shoot him in the foot. Once it all goes to hell, Blofeld does decide to try and just shoot him, resulting in the novel and film's famously tragic ending. In Diamonds Are Forever, the Spangled Mob is totally gone. Blofeld is impersonating the Howard Hughes-like Willard White in order to create a satellite laser weapon with which he intends to blackmail the world once more, selling ultimate military superiority to the highest bidder by destroying national arsenals. The idea for the plot was actually based on a dream Cubby Broccoli had. He was a friend of Howard Hughes, and the dream saw Hughes replaced by an imposter. In addition to changing his appearance once more, and somehow growing hair, perhaps earlier he'd been shaving it off, Blofeld has created doubles via plastic surgery. He's even made sure the doubles have their own cats. He doesn't seem quite as stable this time around, perhaps feeling the effects of his defeats at the hands of Bond. His mannerisms are very different, perhaps fitting the overall cheesy feeling of the film, but Charles Gray does get to deliver a few good lines, such as his reply when finding out his satellite weapon is currently over Kansas. Well, if we destroy Kansas, the world may not hear about it for years. It was originally intended to have Spectre involved in The Spy Who Loved Me, as mentioned earlier, but the legal battles eventually prevented this. Early concepts of the script actually involved the organisation as it stood being wiped out and replaced by a brand new incarnation comprised of members of then prominent terrorist organisations. A sort of villainous changing of the guard. Blofeld's final appearance in the original continuity was an unnamed one, but the figure is Blofeld in all but name. He tries to kill Bond during the early events of For Your Eyes Only by remotely hijacking the helicopter Bond is travelling in. This Blofeld is wheelchair bound, presumably from the battering received at the end of Diamonds Are Forever, where his submarine was used as a wrecking ball. Admittedly, the neck injury he received in On Her Majesty's Secret Service can't have helped, since he is seen in a neck brace at the end of that, and he doesn't appear to have any backup means of eliminating Bond besides the remote control system on the helicopter. Blofeld decides to take his time killing Bond, which allows our hero to turn the tables by destroying the remote control system and ultimately picking up Blofeld's wheelchair, dumping the arch-villain down a factory chimney to his ultimate end. At least the cat made a safe break for it. Upon Spectre's return in the Daniel Craig continuity, Blofeld once again changed manner. Christoph Waltz's incarnation of the character, whose real name was Franz Oberhauser, is far more sadistic than the cold sociopathy of Fleming's Blofeld and the first film incarnation. This Blofeld is the son of Hans Oberhauser, the man who adopted James Bond after the latter's parents were killed in a climbing accident. Notably, this is the first time any mention of Oberhauser was made in any film continuity. The young Blofeld was jealous of the attention James received, and this petty spite grew into immense resentment, especially when asked to consider James his brother. He makes a comparison with the cuckoo, which steals the nests of other birds and tricks them into raising its eggs, and this comparison would remain in their later encounters. Franz murdered his father, faked his death in an avalanche, and took his mother's maiden name of Blofeld before disappearing into the shadows. This Blofeld's cruelty is far more pronounced, being involved in a wide range of sinister crimes and not once caring about the ramifications of his actions. Cold-blooded physical torture can be par for the course, and psychological torture is also on the cards. In fact, he has a tendency to kill people just because he feels like it, according to his backstory. A tendency which would come back to bite him, but at the time seemed to increase his ruthlessness and sociopathy. The crimes his version of Spectre commits tend to be far more coldly realistic than supervillainous weapon hijacking. Terrorism, affecting regime change, slavery, all manner of harsh and inhumane operations, which caused even his most trusted lieutenant, Mr. White, to ultimately balk. Even the origins of the name are less cartoonish. Early drafts of Spectre's script had Blofeld serving in a foreign legion unit, the Spectre of St. Peter, alongside Mr. White. The two would survive being left for dead in a sandstorm alongside 8 comrades, all of whom Blofeld killed, and named the shadowy organisation which grew from their existing criminal dealings after that unit. And yet, despite the sheer power this incarnation of Spectre has, despite all he can do and has done, Blofeld cannot help but show a sadistic, almost petty desire to spite Bond and make him suffer for allegedly ruining his life. Blofeld claims that he has been the author of all of Bond's pain, the man behind every incident which occurred in the Craig continuity. It's something of an outlandish claim. And yet, were this the old Spectre, it might just work. Lashif is a terrorist financier who funds various organisations on behalf of Quantum. Dominic Green is involved in an extortion plot for Quantum, and yet it was clear someone was pulling his strings. Raul Silva presumably needed someone to lend him all those mercenaries and equipment, and his plan is all about revenge. And we know Spectre is involved with Nine Eyes and the world of counterintelligence. All four aspects of the original Spectre, mentioned in their acronym, neatly lined up in the Craig films. But like I said, I don't know if this was intended or was just a happy accident. Regardless, Blofeld takes great joy in trying to utterly break Bond and make him suffer immensely, adding an even nastier element to him. While he seems to take great pleasure in hurting anyone he can, forcing Madeline Swan to watch the footage of her father's death for one thing, he's determined to make Bond completely miserable in every aspect, all for the incidents in his past he never got over. He's prepared to go to incredible lengths just to try and destroy Bond, something which backfires because he just can't do the practical thing. Bond has to suffer before being killed, and it's not enough to inflict conventional levels of suffering. Blofeld goes so far as to destroy his relationship with Madeline Swan, all from that desire to break Bond mentally. For all his power, for all the control he has over criminal operations and counterintelligence schemes, deep down this Blofeld is still a petulant child in ways, and that can make him all the more terrifying. Or disappointing, depending on how you view the matter, as the idea of Blofeld holding such deeply ingrained and potentially petty grudges may not have sat well with some. The family connection does work fairly well though, since this forms the dark mirror to Bond connection of the Craig continuity. Bond is skilled enough and dangerous enough to become a truly powerful threat should he choose to be, especially in a world full of corrupt agents. For all the burdens his job inflicts on him, Bond is determined to do what he thinks is right and will see things through to the end. He has undergone great tragedy and yet presses on to save the day. Blofeld refused to let go, being corrupted and twisted by the bitterness stemming from those perceived slights. He is still determined to destroy Bond despite being arrested. While it appears he's gone insane and is rambling to himself, his bionic eye conveys orders to Spectre from within his prison, and he tries to set up what should be the death of Bond as a birthday present to himself. Spectre is gone in both continuities. Finished after Diamonds Are Forever, and finally dispatched with Blofeld, but we can't say it in For Your Eyes Only, and destroyed during the events of No Time to Die by a simple, practical application of the hijacked Heracles nanobots. Blofeld himself falls victim to the nanobots, though for a moment it looked like his goading might have finally prompted Bond to snap and strangle him to death. 007 barely restrains himself from doing so, but unbeknownst to him, the nanobots finish the job. If Bond had strangled Blofeld there and then, perhaps it would have been a final victory to Blofeld, and Bond knew that. But the realization Blofeld was the one who caused him to break his relationship with the wholly innocent Madeline hit Bond particularly hard. The one chance he may have had to be truly happy, gone. Yet though it currently lies defunct, there is no doubt Spectre's presence will live on. The organisation and its operatives changed the face of spy fiction and proved an influence on pop culture. It was Spectre in the literary Thunderball which effectively popularised the concept of nuclear terrorism as a plot, compared to previous works focusing on destructive global wars. The octopus symbol, showcasing the organisation's sinister reach and unrelenting grasp, has remained an icon of evil. It even provides a name for Spectre when it appears in All But Name during the video game From Russia With Love. An admittedly fun adventure which was actually Sean Connery's last appearance as 007. Blofeld himself, as I have mentioned, inspired many a villain, serious or otherwise. With the legal battles over Spectre settled and the organisation back in the hands of the franchise owners, it's pretty clear that while James Bond will return, so too will Spectre at some point. I will make a final note that there's a really big case of what could have been with Never Say Never Again. I'll go into more depth on that film later on, but naturally Blofeld appears as the head of Spectre once more, announcing to the world the full reach of their evil plan and the theft of the nuclear weapons. It's just unfortunate most of Blofeld's scenes here were cut from the film, since this version of Blofeld is played by no less than Max von Sydow. Imagine how awesome such an actor as one of cinema's most famous villains would have been to have in the long term. Let's have a bit of bonus information because unfortunately I got through everything a little too quickly, I think. So as I've mentioned, Spectre has had a lot of homages and parodies. You have organisations like MAD in Inspector Gadget, Thrush in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and Scorpia in the Alex Rider series, which are all in some ways parodies or homages to Spectre. They have wound up providing so much inspiration for nebulous evil organisations the world over. Of course, there are plenty of other spoofs along the way, and quite a lot of parodies have Spectre-like organisations along the way. Not bad for a group with somewhat questionable origins as to who created them. Some sources claim that Ian Fleming, who had used the word Spectre as a bit of a theme in previous novels, had created Spectre. However, Raymond Benson actually attributes it to Kevin McClory. Speaking of McClory, the lawsuit only gave him the cinematic rights to Spectre and Blofeld. The literary rights actually remained with Ian Fleming's estate, which is why John Gardner was able to use Spectre when he was commissioned to continue the James Bond novels. The fact the cinematic rights were involved is why McClory was able to make Never Say Never Again in 1983, though when the settlement was made, he wasn't allowed to make any adaptations of Thunderball for at least 10 years after the release of the film. He did try to keep making films based on the Thunderball idea, but there were legal battles surrounding that, and the project never really got off the ground. It is interesting to note that Spectre was originally created because Ian Fleming believed the Cold War could wrap up in the years between him writing the screenplay and the movie actually getting produced, so he didn't want to date the movie. He wanted to create an independent adversary for James Bond to wind up facing off against. It's a little ironic that by the time the novel was actually published, the Cold War would heat up again with some of the most dire circumstances the world had ever faced at the time, and an actual possibility of nuclear war with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Since then though, even though the threat of nuclear war occasionally rears its head, mostly any nuclear threats are limited to spy movie spoofs, and to be honest, let's hope they stay that way, because the classic hijack some nuclear warheads and hold the world to ransom trope has become a bit cliched, and it's almost played for laughs these days. Hopefully, as I said, it stays that way. And there you go. Fast animation is one of those silliness switch cheats. Enemies all move faster, which can mean you can get swarmed if you're playing without invincibility, but it does get very, very funny. If you manage to isolate an opponent, you have infinite ammo, and get the level editor mode, max their health out, and just constantly tap the fire button with double clobs. The reactions are very, very funny. I've also probably shown what happens when you have explosions and fast animation, but you also get some very interesting moments in the end of level cutscenes because fast animation counts for that too. As you saw, there's a set point to which Bond and Natalia will run, but Bond just keeps going, running towards the trees, as if he knows exactly how much trouble it's going to be, rescuing Natalia, watching her get into trouble, rescuing Natalia, watching her get into trouble again, and all that jazz. Which is kind of unfortunate because she is very, very capable in the movie. Hopefully you got something out of the lesson, but I was really, really chuffed that I nailed fast animation first time. As a matter of fact, I managed to glitch the game by doing so well that Mishkin and his guards didn't have time to load in. It is so tight getting fast animation, but I just had the black box appear right in front of me. So I could run in, get it, dash back, and away we go. And I even got stuck on scenery, and I still nailed it with 6 seconds to spare. That's not too bad. Interestingly enough, I think black boxes are actually an Australian invention. But there we go. So we have set ourselves up for the next one, and oh, it's a doozy. The cheat on Archives is one of the toughest in the game. It's a companion piece to invincibility. You're not quite invincible, but you will be invisible. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Until next time, this is Red 2, returning to base.